The story of the German prisoner of war who escaped captivity and unexpectedly fell in love with America is one of the most surprising, human, and emotional narratives to come out of the Second World War. It begins not on American soil, but in the devastation and desperation of a collapsing Nazi Germany, where young men were recruited, trained, and sent into battle with promises of glory that never existed in reality. Among these soldiers was a young German infantryman whose name would one day be remembered not because he served Hitler's army, but because of the incredible journey that would transform him from an enemy soldier into a man who admired the very nation he once fought against. When the war began, Germany's propaganda machine created a powerful illusion that German soldiers were invincible, that victory was certain, and that America, far across the ocean, was industrially weak and morally soft. Young men were taught that American soldiers were inexperienced, and America itself was a land of chaos, crime, greed, and deep racial division. These lies shaped the minds of millions of German soldiers who had never seen the outside world. They believed that Germany was fighting for survival and that the enemy was inhuman. So when this young German soldier was captured by American forces in the final months of the war, he expected brutality, starvation, and humiliation. Instead, he experienced something that shook the very foundations of everything he had been taught. His capture occurred during the chaotic collapse of German lines in Western Europe. American units advancing into the Rhineland encountered exhausted, hungry, and poorly equipped German troops. Many were just teenagers. Others were veterans who no longer believed in the war. During a nighttime clash, the young soldier was captured along with dozens of others. He expected anger and perhaps even death. But what he saw stunned him. The American soldiers offered water. They offered food. One soldier even gave him a cigarette before securing his hands. It was a simple gesture, yet powerful enough to create a crack in the wall of decades of propaganda. He was supposed to hate them, yet the first thing they gave him was kindness. He was transported to a temporary holding camp and then placed on a ship heading toward the United States. Like many German POWs of the time, he had no idea what awaited him. During the long journey across the Atlantic, he listened to the waves crash against the steel hull while thinking about his homeland, now in ruins. Germany's cities were burning. Its economy collapsed, and millions of civilians were displaced. The idea that he might never see home again tormented him, but he also noticed that American guards on the ship were surprisingly fair, almost friendly. They followed rules. They weren't cruel. It was as if the war existed only on the battlefield, not inside their hearts. Upon arriving in America, he expected prison fences and harsh punishment. Instead, he was taken to one of the many POW camps spread across the country, camps that resembled small towns more than prisons. He walked past wooden barracks, saw open recreational fields, and even noticed a baseball diamond near the center. There was structure, discipline, and security, but the environment was far gentler than he ever imagined. Guards spoke politely. Food was served consistently. Prisoners were allowed to write letters, receive packages, and even work jobs inside the camp. For someone coming from the bombed-out ruins of Germany, this was a shocking sight. The American people, despite being at war, treated their prisoners according to the Geneva Convention. In fact, many POWs later said that their treatment in America was better than their lives in Germany during the war. At first, the German soldier didn't know what to make of it. Was it a trick? Was it propaganda? Or was this simply the American way of life? He listened as American guards discussed their families, their hometowns, their music, and their dreams. He noticed how casual, open, and optimistic they seemed, even when talking about war. Germany taught its soldiers that Americans were simple-minded and uncultured. But the more he listened, the more he realized just how wrong those teachings were. As the weeks passed, he observed everyday American life through small details. The way workers delivered supplies to the camp with cheerful conversation, the way families walking near the camp perimeter waved at the guards, and the way American soldiers joked with each other even during long nights of duty. He saw freedom. Not just political freedom, but a freedom in attitude, in mentality, in how people live their lives. There was no fear of secret police, no looming dictatorship, no propaganda blaring from loudspeakers. America felt alive, open, and confident. Inside the camp, the German prisoners built a structured routine. They worked in fields, repaired buildings, and learned English from volunteer teachers. This soldier began to pick up the language quickly. It fascinated him. Its rhythm, its expression, its simplicity. He read American newspapers provided to the POWs. At first, he distrusted them, assuming they were filled with lies. But as he cross-checked stories with guards and with foreign broadcasts available in the camp, he realized the news was real. America didn't hide its flaws. It didn't hide its political debates, its disagreements, its conflicts. Everything was open, right there on the page. One of his biggest surprises came when he was assigned to work on a nearby farm. American farmers, many of whom had sons fighting in Europe, treated the POWs with a surprising level of decency. The farmer's wife brought cold lemonade to the men on hot days. The children, curious and innocent, asked them questions about Germany. For the first time in his life, the German soldier interacted with Americans outside the military. They didn't see him as a monster. They saw him as a young man far from home, caught in a war he didn't choose. Little by little, the psychological walls built by Nazi propaganda began to crumble. The more he worked alongside Americans, the more he noticed differences between the two worlds. American farmers talked freely about politics, openly criticizing their own government without fear. Workers in town debated sports, music, movies, and future inventions, as if the world was full of endless possibility. There was an energy, a hopefulness, a belief that tomorrow would be better than today. Germany, under the Nazi regime, had been filled with fear, surveillance, and strict obedience. But America was built on individual freedom. That freedom was intoxicating to him. One evening, while sitting near the fence looking at the sunset, he heard music drifting from a guard's radio, a slow jazz tune. The music was unlike anything allowed in Nazi Germany. It felt alive, expressive, human. The guard noticed him listening and, without hesitation, turned the radio slightly so the sound was clearer. The guard didn't say a word. He just nodded. That small gesture, that simple sharing of music between former enemies, struck the soldier deeply. It was the moment he understood that the world was bigger than the ideology he had been raised under. By late 1945, after the war officially ended, the German soldier, like thousands of other POWs, expected to be sent home soon. But before that happened, an unexpected incident changed everything. Along with a few fellow prisoners, he managed to slip out of the camp during a work detail. It was not a violent escape. There were no weapons, no attacks. They simply walked away when guards were distracted. His plan was simple: avoid repatriation, avoid returning to a Germany destroyed by war, and somehow find a future in America. What he didn't expect was how America itself and its people would respond to him. During his short time outside the camp, he witnessed more of real American life. He saw bustling towns, friendly shopkeepers, and a society returning to peace with remarkable speed. He met a family who offered him food without knowing who he was. He saw communities gathering for festivals, churches ringing with song, and stores overflowing with goods even after years of war. The abundance, the optimism, the kindness, it overwhelmed him. But he was soon captured again without resistance. The guards, instead of punishing him harshly, simply returned him to camp with stern warnings. One of the guards even asked him, "Why did you run?" His answer was honest: "Because I didn't want to leave this country." The guard, surprised, simply nodded. He understood. People laughed in diners, children rode bicycles down long tree-lined streets, farmers waved at strangers passing their fields. The simplicity, the quiet, the freedom. It confused him. For a man raised in a totalitarian structure, freedom itself was frightening. He wondered how a society this open could possibly wage a global war with such overwhelming strength. Days later, he reached a rural town, hungry and exhausted. A shopkeeper noticed him lingering outside. The man simply opened the door and called out, "You look tired, son. Come in, have something warm." The escaped POW froze. Back in Germany, kindness to a stranger was unusual, and kindness during wartime toward someone who looked foreign was unthinkable. But the American simply poured him coffee and placed a plate of eggs in front of him. When he offered payment, the shopkeeper laughed. "Just pay it forward someday." It was a phrase he didn't understand then, but it stayed with him. As he moved from town to town, he encountered a type of casual goodwill that made him increasingly conflicted. He had been taught that America was corrupt, chaotic, and spiritually empty, but the reality he walked through felt completely different. In Germany, the state demanded loyalty. Here, people chose it for themselves. The difference struck him harder than any battlefield. One evening, a traveling preacher stopped his car beside him and offered a ride. The preacher spoke gently, explaining nothing about politics, nothing about war, only about life, ordinary life. The German listened silently as the preacher described how Americans believe deeply in personal opportunity. "A man can start with nothing and rise to anything," he said, "not because the state chooses him, but because he chooses himself." That idea, so simple, yet so impossible in Nazi Germany, stunned him. For the first time in his life, he questioned everything he had served. But the American police were efficient. Days later, while resting near a freight depot, he heard the unmistakable sound of boots and commands. Military police surrounded him before he could run. They expected resistance, but he simply raised his hands, exhausted and resigned. As they cuffed him, he braced for shouting, humiliation, or worse. Yet the sergeant only said, "You gave us a good chase, kid. You hungry?" And so the man who had escaped captivity found himself back in a jeep, being handed a sandwich by the very enemy he had fled from. Back at the POW camp, the guards were surprisingly calm. One of them joked, "Next time, leave a note before you take a vacation." The others laughed, not cruelly, but as if he were an adventurous teenager rather than a prisoner of war. That night, lying on his cot, he realized something profound. He did not fear these people. He respected them. As the months passed, he learned English better, worked on nearby farms, and interacted freely with civilians. At harvest time, families invited POW laborers to picnic tables loaded with food. At Christmas, children handed the prisoners cards they had drawn themselves, simple sketches of trees, snowmen, and hope. He kept several of those cards for decades. Something inside him changed permanently. He began comparing the world he had left behind with the world he was living in. In Germany, fear flowed downward from authority, and obedience flowed upward from citizens. In America, responsibility flowed in both directions. People questioned their leaders, argued in the open, voted publicly, spoke freely, even mocked their own government without fear of punishment. And yet the country functioned with incredible power. How could a nation so relaxed, so loud, so free, also build the world's most formidable military machine? He realized the answer slowly. Freedom made people stronger, not weaker. When the war finally ended, he expected to be shipped home immediately. Instead, repatriation took months. During that time, he worked side by side with Americans rebuilding damaged infrastructure, warehouses, and rail lines. He admired their efficiency, their lack of arrogance, their ability to treat former enemies with unexpected fairness. It was not forgiveness exactly, but something close to it. Eventually, the day came to return to Germany. As he boarded the truck that would take him to the port, an American guard handed him a small brown envelope. Inside were photographs taken during the harvest season, showing POWs working alongside American families. On the back of one photo was written, "Good luck on your new life." He folded the picture carefully, as if afraid it might break. When he arrived in his destroyed homeland, he felt like a stranger. Germany was ruins, ashes, ration lines, suspicion, silence. But inside his coat pocket lay a different memory, a picture from a country that treated him better as a prisoner than his own government had treated him as a soldier. Within 2 years, he applied for immigration papers. People questioned him. How could a former German POW choose to live in the very nation that had defeated his? He answered simply, "Because I learned what freedom feels like." He returned to America not as an enemy, but as a man reborn. He worked first as a mechanic, then a machinist, and eventually opened a small workshop of his own. He married, raised children, and built a life of modest peace. Every Independence Day he stood quietly as fireworks lit the sky, remembering the day he first saw this land not as a prisoner, but as a man who finally understood the meaning of liberty. Years later, when he was asked what had changed him most, he said, "America did not win me with power. It won me with kindness." And although his uniform had once carried the emblem of an enemy, his heart carried the memory of a country that showed him a truth stronger than any army, that freedom, generosity, and dignity could transform even a captured soldier into a loyal citizen. His story became a reminder of what America's greatest weapon had always been, not its factories, not its armies, but its people. The people who, even in war, knew how to show compassion. The people who could turn an enemy into a friend. The people who taught a German prisoner that the greatest victory is not in defeating others, but in allowing them to become something better. And that was how a German POW escaped from prison and fell in love with America.